Kennedy has always been admired for his affability, elegance, and skillful handling of difficult situations. In the midst of the nuclear weapons race with the Soviet Union, he was exceptional in his ability to complete the limited test prohibition deal, though JFK's presidency was not all that positive. From the attempt to assassinate Fidel Castro to his role in the Berlin crisis are some of the many things that might shock you. Here are some of the questionable things about JFK's presidency. The 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, served in office from January 20, 1961, to his assassination on November 22, 1963. That is merely 3 years. He was a Democrat from Massachusetts who was elected president after barely defeating existing Vice President Richard Nixon in the 1960 presidential election. Let's have a look at things that Kennedy did during his 3 years tenure. Early in the 1960s, Fidel Castro's rise to power and the Cuban Revolution were two of the most pressing issues for American foreign policy. Kennedy was accused of being weak on the issue of battling communism in Cuba by Richard Nixon, who was the vice president at the time during presidential debates. In response, Kennedy published a statement in the New York Times urging the Eisenhower administration to support local Cuban forces working to overthrow Castro. Nixon was enraged with Kennedy because he believed that JFK was attempting to damage Nixon's reputation by being aware of the administration's planned covert operation. He did not openly accept that the joint operation by the CIA and the Eisenhower administration was under process. Nixon attributed his final defeat in the election to this scandal. Here, the question of how Kennedy learned of the covert invasion of Cuba arises. Did he have any connections to the CIA, or did CIA directors support Kennedy's victory? This proves that the Kennedy administration was active even before winning the presidency. The race for the presidency in 1960 was very tight, despite the fact that Kennedy received 303 votes to Nixon's 219 in the Electoral College. It seems to be a landslide victory for Kennedy. Less than 0.5% of the total votes cast, or around 120,000 ballots, made up the difference in the public election. There were accusations of corruption soon after Kennedy's triumph, notably in Illinois and Texas. Nixon would have won the election if he had won both of the 47 Electoral College votes that Texas and Illinois combined. Nixon's supporters accused that significant electoral fraud and ballot box stuffing had taken place in both states. Additionally, they accused them of robbing Nixon of the victory. Fidel Castro rapidly seized power in Cuba in 1959 with the aid of a revolutionary army. Castro, however, quickly attracted the wrath of Washington by encroaching on the communist sphere of the Soviet Union by signing deals for Soviet oil and declaring their alliance publicly. When John F. Kennedy took office, he gave the go-ahead to continue the invasion, which ended in total failure. The Cuban army murdered over 100 U.S.-trained paramilitaries there while also seizing about 1,200 others. JFK's choices were held accountable for the Bay of Pigs fiasco as JFK gave orders to launch the operation at night, his denial to allow the Navy to assist the Cuban forces, and his reluctance to the second round of bombing. The Kennedy administration was still trying to overthrow Fidel Castro in Cuba after the Bay of Pigs assault ended in failure. Operation Mongoose was started by the Kennedy administration less than a year later in January 1962. Senior CIA agent William Harvey, who was also working on the project, Harvey chose to use the mafia to murder Castro after failing to take action on the operation for several months. Mobsters Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli were given poison doses by Harvey to present to Castro in Cuba, but they were unable to carry out the kill. A botched plan to send Castro a diving suit contaminated with the fungus was another unsuccessful assassination attempt during the JFK administration, but the suit was never delivered, resulting in another failure. Following JFK's assassination in November 1963, Lyndon Johnson, the new president, progressively shut Operation Mongoose. Kennedy referred to the idea of American military assistance to the French during the First Indochina War between the Viet Minh and the French as being self-destructive and potentially pointless. Only 700 American troops were present in Vietnam when Eisenhower stepped down as president in January 1961. JFK gradually sent troops to Vietnam, making America an active player in the war that lasted for decades. The JFK administration dispatched 500 troops consisting of special forces and military professionals to Vietnam during the first 4 months of the presidency. Within 2 years, 10,000 advisors were sent. By 1963, at the time of JFK's murder, the number of American troops present in the nation was about 16,700, which was 16,000 more than in 1960. While the conflict in Vietnam was escalating during the year 1963, some of the most cataclysmic events of the entire war took place. On the celebration of Buddha's 2,527th birthday, South Vietnamese soldiers and police officers killed and assaulted several Buddhist worshippers. In protest, a Buddhist monk doused himself in gasoline and immolated his body in front of the entire world. South Vietnamese President Ngo Dinh Diem continued to escalate the war on the Buddhists, and his forces started to openly kill women and children in their pagodas. Kennedy approved a proposed action ambassador to South Vietnam to overthrow the Diem government. With monetary help of $40,000 from the CIA, the Vietnamese generals killed Diem in the first few days of November. Kennedy instantly expressed regret for his choice. However, it's unlikely that it would have happened at all without his assistance. Due to the U-2 spy aircraft affair in 1960, negotiations between Khrushchev and the Eisenhower administration fell apart, and Khrushchev made the decision to postpone further discussions until the new presidential administration. The Soviet leader once more granted the United States 6 months to depart Berlin during the Vienna summit with Kennedy in 1961. Kennedy replied by mobilizing 150 Army reservists and sending 1,500 troops along the Autobahn to the capital of Germany. It is believed that the Berlin Wall, which divided East from West Berlin, was then put up on August 13, 1961 by the East German government because of JFK's actions. Cheddi Jagan was chosen as the next Prime Minister of British Guiana after winning 75% of the Assembly's members. Due to Jagan's alleged communist sympathies, John McCone, the director of the CIA, and Kennedy began to examine possible ways to have him removed from power. In October of that year, Jagan visited the White House to try and persuade the administration that he was not supporting the Soviet Union. Instead of listening to him, JFK launched a $2 million effort the following August to remove Jagan. The CIA began supporting Forbes Burnham, Jagan's political rival, in the course of 1963. Kennedy was slain in November 1963, precluding any action, but the CIA was still able to remove Jagan from power in 1964 with the help of the British. For Americans, one of the scariest moments was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Based on intelligence, the Kennedy administration came to know that the Soviet Union was moving nuclear weapons into the island of Cuba, according to the Kennedy administration. JFK learned about the locations after a surveillance aircraft captured them on camera on August 29th. But instead of taking any action, he instructed his staff to suppress the information. He was concerned about a scandal similar to that of the midterm election. Kennedy canceled all U-2 flights over Cuba weeks after one of the spy planes was shot down over China. Soviets took the opportunity and on October 4th deployed 99 nuclear missiles in Cuba. The weapons were confirmed when U-2 flights resumed. This information created chaos in the American public and began the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy was concerned about communism's emergence and expansion in Africa similar to Vietnam. The Soviet Union began to establish itself in the Northeast. Kennedy started giving neutral African leaders financial incentives to support the U.S. over the Soviet Union, but he did nothing to promote genuine African nationalism and independence. He continued to rely on the nation's priceless minerals for commerce and refused to support any economic sanctions. Even while JFK eventually agreed to sign an arms embargo on them, he still continued to provide them with military spares, thereby undercutting the limits. Colonel Joseph Mobutu launched a coup and took control of Congo during the Congo crisis. The Kennedy administration helped Mobutu in his efforts to establish a stable and pro-Western Congo by providing him with significant financial support and by signing bilateral military agreements. Mobutu renamed the country Zaire and adopted the name Mobutu Sese Seko. Prior to his overthrow in 1997, he governed the nation for 3 decades. Due to the extreme instability of his regime, he frequently dealt with uprisings and coup attempts. He was also known for his widespread corruption, which allowed him to amass a fortune despite ruling a nation that was socially and economically stagnant. However, without Kennedy's assistance, he might not have risen to prominence in the 1960s. Additionally, Kennedy was also involved in installing a secret recording system inside the White House. Not only that he had many rumors of infidelity during his presidency term with secretaries and staff, the most famous of them was with actress Marilyn Monroe. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked the video, check out other historical videos on our channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so that you don't miss out on such interesting topics.